The Justice Department is abusing the rule of law in their crazed prosecution of these January 6 defendants. And on top of that, obviously, they're seeking to blow up our Republican form of government with these abusive prosecutions of Trump, both in federal courts and by their Democratic allies in New York and in Georgia. The Supreme Court last week just took up a case. And it's an important case because it impacts at least two of the charges against Trump. And it's the issue of the federal law that is being used to try to jail Trump, and which has been used to convict or try to convict. I'm not sure what the exact stat or description is, but at least 300 people, I think, have been faced charges under this novel interpretation or application of this statute related to January 6th. And it's a statute related to the obstruction of an official proceeding. And the law that is from which these prosecutions are being drawn from are part of the Sarbanes-Oxley laws, that law that was passed after the 2008 financial crisis. And it was, it's an anti-capitalist law, so they're pretending to be concerned that rather than the government causing the crisis, that it was the companies that caused the crisis, and so therefore they're going to try to put more people in jail for it. But that's another debate, right? But a January 6th defendant has appealed their interpretation of the law all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court granted certification. So they're going to take the case, granted cert, not certification, cert, certiorari, and typically that's 4 judges or 4 justices that have to be interested in order for the case to be taken up by the court. So there are at least 4 justices who have questions about what the Justice Department is doing here. As I said, it's a novel application of the law, and this is why. The law, and I think we have a section of it, quote, this is the issue, and this is the law that's being used to prosecute everyone. Whoever corruptly alters, destroys, mutilates, or conceals a record, document, or other object, or attempts to do so with the intent to impair the object's integrity or availability for use in an official proceeding, or otherwise obstructs, influences, or impedes any official proceeding or attempts to do so, shall be fined under this title in prison not more than 20 years or both. So what the Justice Department under Joe Biden has done for the first time in history is use this law to prosecute people involved in, well, in this case, the January 6th disturbance, a civil disturbance, and using that to say, well, they meant to, the law is meant to cover the sort of actions, let's say rioting or disturbances that cause Congress to have to shut down for a little bit and impede its, quote, official proceeding, meaning the counting of ballots on January 6th. So the lower court agreed with the defendant that this isn't the right application of the law. The D.C. Appellate Court had, I guess it was a 2-to-1 decision, and it was all over the place. I think even the 2 judges who were in the majority were at odds about how the law should apply, and obviously the dissenter thought they were all wet. And so now the Supreme Court thinks, has decided they're going to figure it out. And obviously, if you're the Biden administration and you're Jack Smith, you're worried you're going to lose because there are at least 4 justices who are concerned about the way this law has been applied. Does it mean they will lose? No, but it certainly raises questions. But I want to go back to that. I want you to think about what this means, right? So what the January 6th defendant and his supporters are saying in these briefs, and the court thought the question serious enough that they're going to consider it, is that this law is designed to ensure that evidence, like paper, material evidence, material in the physical sense, isn't messed with and destroyed. And otherwise is kind of is in keeping with the prior paragraph. So bring that up again, the law, if you could, guys. So whoever corruptly alters, destroys, mutilates, or conceals a record, right? So the January 6th defendant says, well, otherwise means otherwise, like things like altering, destroying, mutilating, or concealing a record or document or other object. And using that to impede an official proceeding. Now, the Biden administration is saying, well, otherwise means what the January 6ers did. It doesn't have to be tied to an official proceeding related to, or it doesn't have to be tied to documents or things like that that were being sought in the course of an official proceeding. So the question is, how is the court going to construct, or how are they going to, I guess, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm hesitant to use the phrase, but I think it fits. What is going to be their statutory construction in analyzing this? Are they going to say otherwise should be read in concert with the destruction of physical evidence, or should it be otherwise means that people disrupting an official proceeding in a protest or such, or other means like that, that's covered by this law too? I think the defendants have the better, the January 6th defendant, it makes more sense because to read it as anything other than that, it means otherwise means all sorts of conduct, including First Amendment conduct, and virtually every communication with Congress could subject you to being put in jail if, like what we're seeing right now, Joe Biden doesn't like what you're telling Congress, right? They don't like what President Trump told Congress, so they're using this law to jail him for it because he was obstructing them otherwise by telling them stuff they didn't think was true or accurate or they disagreed with. It's banana republic stuff. And to me, the Biden administration, it's not so much the January 6ers, right? Although I think they have a strong case this law doesn't apply to their conduct. But if there's anyone who's highlights the absurdity of the Justice Department's position here, it's the case of Trump, where they're saying his making a speech, disagreeing with people around him who say, oh, you really lost, and otherwise advocating as president to make sure the election was done right, or advocating as a candidate to make sure the election was done right, however you slice it, makes you a criminal. And if that's the case, let's say the Justice Department analysis is right, then I would argue further, and I think the defendants would argue, I was saying the defendants, but the January 6th petitioner would argue, then it's too broad. It would cover too much conduct, and it needs to be redone. And is impermissibly vague and such. So that's kind of my understanding of where we are with that Supreme Court case. So there are two big Supreme Court issues potentially. Whether Trump has presidential immunity and whether or not he can be prosecuted and these hundreds of citizens can be prosecuted for obstructing Congress based on a financial crimes law. So you can imagine where I'm coming down on this, and I think I try to explain it fairly so you can understand both sides of the argument there. And I think the president has the better argument for presidential immunity. And I think the defendants have the better argument for reading this law commonsensically to apply to what it was intended to apply to, which was impeding investigations of financial matters, not debates before Congress. So we'll see what happens. But either way, I think it's going to be almost impossible for the Biden regime to try to get Trump tried before the election. Now, is it possible the Supreme Court deals with all of this immediately? Maybe. I mean, there are other ways the Justice Department can get around this, the two charges related to obstructing an official proceeding. Maybe they just drop it, and say, we'll just go to town on this, on these other issues. So I don't know what's going to happen one way or the other, but I'm guessing the Biden regime's desperate effort to jail Trump is going to face a significant, before the election, isn't going to happen. I'm just guessing. There won't be a trial before the election. But the justice system has been so perverted when it comes to Trump, I can't even, I'd say I'm like 70% certain. Right? What are the odds, right? I think it's 70%. But who knows, right? I'm kind of guessing here. So I'm not gonna pretend to be all knowing in this regard. So I wanted to explain that to you because you're not going to get a full explanation from the media. And if you want more information on these issues, you can go to the Supreme Court's website. You can look up the docket. You can look at the filings and the arguments. It's all easily. If you're interested in it, you don't have to be a lawyer to understand what's happening and some of the interest. And it's an interesting constitutional argument and issues of how laws are read and such. So it's just interesting in and of itself, but it's also important to the future of our country, right? Because many Americans, myself included, or me included, believe that the Justice Department is abusing the rule of law in their crazed prosecution of these January 6 defendants. And on top of that, obviously, they're seeking to blow up our Republican form of government with these abusive prosecutions of Trump, both in federal courts and by their Democratic allies in New York and in Georgia. So there you have that. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.